Good evening, everybody. My name is Dawn Numdu. I'm your host for this week's hashtag Gather to Grow here on Twitter Spaces. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to all of my amazing speakers that are here today. And our topic, as you can see, is Mzansi's farming future is female. And I believe it with all of my heart. And we're finding out from our very dynamic females working in the agricultural sector today, if they agree with me, and also just more about what they do to celebrate them and just to champion the work that women do in the sector. So I'm not going to do a long introduction. As you guys know, I usually keep my talking points, very limited, and I give my panelists and speakers the floor. And tonight's topic is really important as we celebrate or commemorate Women's Month, and that this discussion will definitely, just be part of the celebration of women in the sector and also talking about some of the challenges that they face. Now, I'm going to ask all of my speakers just to introduce themselves, tell us a little about what they do in the sector. We have a very dynamic group. So without any further ado, I have Karabo Amabuzo, who's an agricultural economist. Karabo, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, where your journey started in agriculture?
Hello to all the listeners. I am Karabo Mabuza. I am an agricultural economist. I've been in the banking industry for about 10 years now. I am also a co-host of an agri-related YouTube channel called Food for Thought with Karabo and Konsi, where we discuss all things agriculture. So for me, I think agriculture was sort of a livelihood, growing up. I grew up in the rural areas. I stayed with my grandparents who were like farming in a subsistence level. My parents also, have some livestock here and there, and then they have a small vegetable garden. So that's how I sort of was introduced to agriculture.
Thank you so much, Karabo. It's great to have you with us. And I don't think it would be fair to not have Kansai speak after you, saying that you guys are the agri duo. So Kansai, tell us a little bit about yourself, where your journey started in agriculture.
Hi, everyone. My name is Konsi Morava. I'm also an agricultural economist. Been in the industry for almost 10 years now, stemming from financial background, also in the financial institution. And now I happen to also be working on the input side, working in the crop protection space, taking care of everything that makes sure that your crops are good and your yields are good by killing any pest or weed that is trying to chow away at your profits. And as Karabo mentioned, recently in 2021, we actually started a YouTube channel called Food for Thought with Karabo and Konsi, where we get to meet really amazing speakers, people who are in the industry, from farming to industry boards to other economists, and just from the whole entire food value chain, discussing all their challenges as well as their highs in the agricultural space. And from what we've learned, it's really been just an exciting journey, so much still to do in the industry. And it's just very dynamic. It's an interesting industry to work in. And I cannot even imagine myself doing or working in any other industry, if not agriculture, because it's really that fun and exciting. And definitely it's Women's Month, and we meet dynamic women in agriculture that are doing amazing things. So I cannot wait for this talk.
Thank you so much, Konse. I really appreciate you being here. And thank you so much for the amazing work that you're doing as part of your channel, and also just championing the sector and making it so available to anyone who'd like to access it. My next guest is Petronella. She is a serial entrepreneur. I can't go over all the aspects of what she does, but Petronella, tell us a little bit about you, where your journey started. You're quite dynamic as well in terms of who you work with and your networks, and just how you've kind of created the space for women and entrepreneurs to grow within the agricultural sector.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Petronella. I'm a crazy serial entrepreneur. Basically, my background is in international business and finance, and I was living abroad for close to 11 years. And then I came back with a vision for changing Africa. And then I met other dynamic women, formed groups like Rise and Reign, Sianda Group, Asha Zebulon groups, which wanted to create a platform for women to grow and reach their dynamic levels. So as a serial entrepreneur, it's people with multiple business ideas that execute different businesses at the same time. And we found this to be a very powerful tool, especially in agriculture, because we were then able to change agriculture as it is normally seen by everyone, where it's just the raw material or raw produce, and we wanted to see it all the way to the end value chain. So I think as we discuss more, you'll get to know more of what we do.
Thanks, Petronella. And then next up, I have Dr. Didi Klaassen. Dr. Didi is AfriVet's executive for technical and marketing support. I think it was important to kind of invite, people that worked in different sectors. Petronella, you work in a very specific space. Dr. Didi Klaassen also works in a very specific space, but it all forms part of agriculture. So maybe just a bit about yourself more, Dr. Klaassen, and also what attracted you to even pursue a career in agriculture.
Hi, Dawn and listeners. My journey is a bit convoluted. So I started studying veterinary science because of a love for animals. And since I can remember, my favorite animal was a cow, even though I grew up in cities and small towns. So I became a vet. I tried private practice for a while and it didn't really appeal to me. So then I joined government and I was there for 8 years. And I really just fell in love with that part of, we don't just work with dogs and cats, but you actively working with farmers, from emerging farmers through to commercial farmers, and you can assist them in their training, their knowledge, etc. And then I joined AfriVet, and the company, we are a pharmaceutical company where we sell dips and dose products, etc. to farmers. But an active component to AfriVet is training and assisting farmers, not only what to buy, but when to use it correctly and be better farmers when it comes to animal health. So it's actively integrated into the agricultural sector and I love it. So that's really awesome.
Thank you so much for being here and also just sharing a bit about your journey. My next guest is Cleopatra. Cleopatra, you're also quite dynamic in, where you're positioned in the agricultural space. Maybe just to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Cleopatra. I'm in agriculture retail, selling inputs and produce, also the mentorship of smallholder farmers. I'm very passionate about agriculture. It's the only way that we can eradicate poverty in South Africa and beyond. Agriculture is all around us. From the moment that you wake up, the sheets that you sleep on, that's cotton, the next slice of bread and the toaster, that's wheat. It's all agriculture. For me, it is the essence of life, really, basically, and being around such great women. I'm looking forward to this discussion tonight.
Thank you so much, Cleopatra. It's great to have you with us. My next guest is Ika Cronje. Ika is a hydroponics farmer. Ika, tell us a bit about what you do, where your journey started. And I don't think you thought you would end up in the agricultural space.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to hear of women in the sector. It's all very impressive. I don't have such a long list of accomplishments. So I started farming about 4 years back when a happy incident on a friend's part fell into my lap. He ordered too many pepper seedlings. And I just decided I'm going to grab it, and I kept them alive for about a week in seedling trays and open space and started to plant. So that was the start of my journey. And I very quickly became very passionate about farming. And I must say I've loved it ever since. I haven't studied anything relating to agriculture. I've only recently started doing Afghasa and Fertasa courses. And I've converted our entire farm into a hydroponics farm last year and started farming with peppers and tomatoes. And currently we are farming ginger hydroponically, which is kind of a new thing in South Africa.
I think there's one thing that I know not to do in the agricultural space, especially when it comes to people who farm. Never downplay their position and never downplay, what it actually takes to wake up every day and do what you do. So Ika, hats off to you. Thank you so much for feeding the nation. My next guest is Lindiwe. Lindiwe is part of the Futures Farmers Foundation, and they do absolutely amazing work. Lindiwe, tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're based, and what attracted you to the agricultural industry.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lindiwe Dlomo, and I am a Future Farmers, graduate. I started out with Future Farmers as an organization that assists students, or rather anybody who's interested in farming. And that went up until they gave me an opportunity to be hosted by a flower farm in Moriva. And it was a great opportunity to learn everything. And thereafter, my mentor from Future Farmers gave me an opportunity to go into the Department of Agriculture. So that has been my journey. I was in government for 10 months as an intern, and this year I had an opportunity to be involved in a precision farming research internship as well. Yeah, that has been going very well.
Thank you so much, Lindiwe, for sharing, a little bit about your experience in the agricultural space and just more about, what you do. My last and final guest, guys, please forgive me. I said this, we have a full house and we're going to go with it. We're going to run with it, is Porsha Marudi. She's a beekeeper. She is definitely doing amazing things in our communities. And I just could not resist but to invite her as well. Porsha, a bit about yourself, more about what you do in the agricultural space.
Good evening to everyone. My name is Porsha Marudi. So what we basically do is that we go out into the remotest of villages, train community members in sustainable agriculture. So one of them being apiculture, and just assisting them to sort of coexist in harmony with nature outside of having a need or feeling a need to move from their communities into the cities. And our focus has been beekeeping throughout, whereby we trying to maintain sort of your natural forests within our communities, and they derive a greater value from setting up these bee businesses. And then we buy back all the produce in a form of honey and byproducts from all these communities. We actually call these communities bee sanctuaries. And we started in 2012, and we've got about 12 between South Africa, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe so far.
Absolutely amazing. I think that covers all of my speakers. Now, women make up 43% of the global agricultural labor force, yet they face, significant discrimination when it comes to accessing land, livestock ownership, equal pay, participation in decision making. There's so many aspects, accessing finance and credit is one of the biggest challenges as well for women. But I maybe want to start the conversation by just really in the perspective of our speakers and in the experience within the industry, where do they think is the biggest gender gap when it comes to agriculture? Where is this the most acute? Kansai, can I maybe bring you into the conversation, and then two of our other speakers can maybe also respond to this question, and then we'll touch on some of the other points as well. Kansai, the floor is yours.
For me, I believe the most acute it is on the ground, on the farms. As much as we have a lot of seasonal workers, not a lot of them are permanent, and also just the kind of jobs that they are exposed to is very low level, low income, and it doesn't really provide much growth for those employees. Working in private sector, you do find a few of us women in high positions, people in the network that are making decisions. But on the farm itself, I believe that is where you find the worst gap in terms of just exposure, in terms of access to skills and access to future development growth. And that's where we need to actually make the most noise and make sure that those ladies are getting the attention that they need so that they can also be better. Because we do know that when a woman's economy is better, the whole household benefits. When there's gender equality, when we can combat that, we can combat economic inequality as well. When there's more money in a woman's pocket, it really goes well. The children's welfare is better. So I think that's where we need to start.
I don't think I could agree more with you in terms of that. Kansai, we see it in the stories that we read every day on Food for Mzansi and so many others about women taking hands with other women and growing communities in that way. Cleopatra, do you agree with Kansai in this regard? And what has your experience been, especially when you think about people just starting out in the industry, women who are just starting out in the industry, because that's definitely the space where you're working in as well?
I agree with her. I've seen a lot of the challenges that she highlighted. So the best way, which is the gap that I'm trying to cover through the mentorship of small-scale farmers, is women need to equip themselves with knowledge. Knowledge needs to be taken to grassroots levels at the very basic local languages, because sometimes there are also those barriers such as language barriers. So we need to dissect and make it as simple as possible for the women in grassroots levels so that they also know the policies, they also know their rights, just like their male counterparts. So I think I agree with her.
Thanks, Cleopatra. Petronella, maybe you can also just respond to this point, specifically thinking about the space that you're working in. Not everyone is working in the on the farm, on the land space. There's a lot of people working in agro processing. There's a lot of people working in positions where you're in, more in terms of development. So where do you see that there's a gender gap in terms of that space?
I totally agree with my fellow speakers, Cleopatra and Conce. But just to add on to what they've said, in the agricultural sector, especially when it comes to mechanization of it, the subsector, you find that it is very male dominated. And like what Cleopatra said, women need to take time to do a lot of research, understand process flows, understand the value chain, understand production and processes very well, because you'll find that most people might plant, for example, tomatoes, but they've not furthered their education to what else can come from tomatoes. We have tomato powder, we have tomato paste. So you'll find that the knowledge is not going down, for example, to the rural ladies or to other laborers to say there's more to farming than just you putting your crop and stopping there, because our approach is to always look at opportunities. We are always looking for an opportunity, for a gap, for women to come through to change. Because if we're going to change Africa and we're going to come in and change and become change agents in agriculture, we actually have to see the whole aspect of agriculture and try to dominate it while working with the males as well, because women have unequal access to inputs and they also face unequal returns, unlike their male counterparts. So for us to succeed and in our own right, we have to actually be very forceful when it comes to acquiring education, research. We actually have to be very forceful. And I think women will be able to execute a lot of products when they actually use that approach.
Thanks so much. And I think I've seen it, even just with the dynamic woman that I've engaged with over the past few years that I've been involved with the sector, is that women should actually champion that and they should encourage other women. So if there's a market, buy from women. That is what we should be encouraging from day one. And I do believe that the industry is, geared towards that at the moment. Let me talk about the animal health space. Dr. Klassen, what are some of the challenges, or do they see a gap within that space as well?
Yeah, I can really agree with what the other speakers said so far. So where I'm more involved is the provision of knowledge and hosting of farmers' days, etc. If I look at what it looked like, let's say 2011, when I started with farmers' days in government, to what we see now, it's still majority male attendees, but the females are becoming more. And I know sometimes it's horrible to think that's the way we think about things. So I'll go to a farmer's day, and it used to be if the females attended, they were there doing the catering, whereas now it's changing. And so there's a lot of excitement brewing, but it's still, there's a huge discrepancy. So let's say 5 to 7% of the people attending will be female. So it would be really great if we can increase those numbers, that the females can also attend, that it's not just males attending these training sessions, and that information is available to them.
Thanks so much, Dr. Klassen. Maybe just as a last point, I would like to ask Porsha just to also talk about her experience in the beekeeping industry, if it's the same, if the work that she's doing is also working in that way. Is that your experience as well, Porsha?
Most definitely. So because we also work mostly in remote villages, we find that there's a cultural barriers that we have to contend with most of the time, because women are expected to be home. They're expected to be looking after kids, and they consider agricultural work to be for males. So you tend to find that they're not even willing to engage you, the men in the community, so your tribal councils, they're not even willing to engage or consider including women in the groups that we would be setting up as part of the community farm that we're setting up there. So there's definitely a whole lot of barriers, and it starts within the communities.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. Now, my next question to my speakers is specifically around, what role should agriculture play in bridging this gap? And how do you guys see it actually practically working? Is the sector living up to its responsibility, in encouraging also greater social cohesion and improved equality? What is your take on this? And how do you guys see it move? For me, it's always important to look at it from a practical perspective. So like Porsha saying, if there's, a rural village that there's difficulty with including women into these conversations, how are we pushing for this? What are we doing on a policy level? What are we doing in terms of accessing land? can we maybe just move the conversation to that? Karabo, maybe you can come in and also share your take on this.
The first thing that we obviously need to do is to just try to get rid of the perception that agriculture is a man's job or a man's world, because women have actually proven to be as equally competent, if not better, because women are nurturers. In terms of the economic growth numbers as well as the job numbers, agriculture is proving to be a very important sector. That's why there's more discussions, in terms from the policy side of things, there's more discussion from policymakers, from the government. And that's why we saw, for instance, during SONA, the president actually talked about the importance of supporting small farmers and actually integrating them to the whole value chain. So it shows the importance of the industry. Also, to be able to solve the problems of unemployment. So women should actually be playing an important role in this element. And it's very encouraging to actually see that we come across a lot of women in farming programs, that are aimed at improving skills of those female farmers, your training and mentorship, just as a whole, to be able to get women empowered, to get them access to those resources, because with those resources, then they can achieve more and contribute more to the economy.
Thanks so much, Karabo. I think that's very vital. And I think that it's important that we sort of push for this agenda, that we continuously, make it a point of discussion, not just in Women's Month, that it becomes part of the conversation that we're having all the time. Maybe I can bring Cleopatra into the conversation in terms of just the input side and how that works. Cleopatra, maybe you can talk about, how it works in terms of your side. Where do you see us kind of trying to bridge the gap in terms of the agricultural gender gap, in terms of the space that you're working in?
In terms of the space that I'm in, all the speakers have spoken and they've spoken very well. We see that women don't have access to the same resources that the male counterparts have, but we've seen the government is doing quite a lot of work in terms of bringing women in and making playground level. I think as we go forward, besides women getting informed, more organizations will help women, and this is one way that women are coming together, like what Food Mzansi is doing, educating women, and we need more examples and more news on women farmers. There are a lot. This house is full of great women. So we need to take this to the grassroots levels for the female farmers. So I really think the future is female farmers.
Thank you so much. Definitely agree with you 100% on that point. Lindiwe, maybe you can talk about, someone that's fairly new in the industry. How do you specifically see us bridging that gap? We do roadshows across the country with school learners, for example. And I don't think half of the girl children in the crowd actually considered, farming as a career. But you can kind of see it changing. So maybe you can talk about, how you are as a new person in the industry working in the space.
I feel like most female students or female girls, they are not exposed to agriculture, and especially when it is a high school setup. No one really considers agriculture. I feel as if we were to bridge that gap where girls know that agriculture is actually a career and it is a solid career, if we were to give them the niche of degrees where you can study your veterinary science, your agricultural management, your BScs, if they were to know that, then they would actually consider agriculture as a career. I feel like we also need to bridge a lot when it comes to equal salaries, because female farm workers especially are not paid equally compared to their male counterparts. I've seen this in farms whereby females are doing the most work, but then they are not paid accordingly just because it's a men's job. The farmers feel as if men deserve more. So if we were to bridge that gap and we were to give especially upcoming agricultural students with access to resources, then we would be able to bridge this gap and we will definitely improve the equality and social cohesion.
Thank you so much, Lindiwe. Now, that actually brings me to, my next point in terms of, women working in the agricultural space. Now, Statistics South Africa reported in 2018 that we have, close to 850,000 agricultural workers in the country. Men make up 2/3 and the rest are women. Now, whilst men's are in the majority with increased job security, the woman's contribution is often still seasonal and, thus by nature precarious and insecure. Now, what are your comments on this and how can we encourage equality in the sector specifically? Petronella, maybe you can come in here working with people from different parts of Africa and also in different spaces.
Speaking from what we've seen so far, I think that the barrier for entry for most women is very frustrating, but it's often basic and it's relatively easy to resolve, sometimes depending on which African country you're dealing with. We all know that women are the backbone of Africa's agricultural sector because from the farm to fork, women are the players that are being involved in the entire agricultural value chain, be it as farmers, livestock breeders, processors, traders, workers, entrepreneurs, or just basic consumers. So you'll find that, like the speakers have been saying, and I'll keep stressing this point, knowledge is key because we found that we have mentored women from a space of 1 to 6 months, and they'll do a greater impact than a woman who's been farming for 5 years and is just stuck in one specific mindset of how to pursue that particular farming produce that they're focused on. So for us to actually counter or to work with the males and to actually see women progressing, from what we've seen is that we need to make women more educated in what they want to achieve. The mindset has to change. Most of the time, women, when they're on the farms, they are living for survival. It's a survival mechanism of feeding. But when you put the business element in it, removing capital, again, because most will say, I can't do this because I don't have the capital resources to actually execute what I need to do. But if you change the mindset from that and give them a platform where you can give them an assignment of 1 acre with the right tools, with the right education, we're seeing that the mindset shift makes them to succeed. And the dynamics from it being a female-led agribusiness remains big compared to when the women are in that process and they're facing men who've been in the industry for long, like the previous speaker spoke about and said that farming is perceived to be a male-dominated industry. So the statistics can speak of, 849,000 workers, but out of that 849,000 workers, majority are women. But they can't be counted because the work that they are doing is seen to be menial. It's not counted for, whether they are being used as fertilizer keepers or whatever it is that they're doing in the process. So for us to actually encourage equality, we have to educate the different groups of women that we have. Women who are going to be champions as small-scale farmers and women who are going to be champions in the commercial sector farmers. I think Inka spoke about hydroponics and she gave a perfect example when she said, I didn't go to school for this, but my passion was what I bring to the table and I can grow from it. And I would say, Inka, it's not really about going to school, it's the passion. The women who've had passion in agriculture seem to execute more and they're not fearful of it being a male-dominated industry. They're able to come on board, they're able to bring numbers, they're able to bring more produce than actually those who've gone to school, but they don't really have the mindset to succeed in that strenuous setup.
Thanks, Petronella. And I actually want to bring Ika into the conversation. I think so often, when we think about women in the agricultural space, when we talk about, committees that are set up to support women within not only women specifically, but agricultural commodity groups or whatever, if there's a woman present in the meeting, she will either be asked to be the secretary or take notes. And I just want to ask if that has also been your experience, Ika, because you're fairly new in the industry, but you've positioned yourself to be part of so many dynamic spaces. You're part of the Koteva Agri-Science, you're part of the Soil Sisters campaign, and that's actually where I met you. That Food for Mzansi is also running. So please do share, what has your experience been, and have people, looked at you differently to say, I'm a farmer? What has that been like?
I strongly agree with all the opinions that the women voiced today. And I must say that I have experienced a lot of having to prove yourself, especially not having studied anything in agriculture. Men would much rather listen to another man's opinion than they would to a woman. So it's kind of you need to prove yourself a lot more than a man would. And in a lot of cases, I found that doing it quietly and keeping to your point, standing strong, you would make a much larger impression on someone than making a scene or taking it on like a head-on collision. So with my experience, I definitely can say that I've experienced some discrimination, but I didn't really think about it until these questions came through. You know, you get so used to being the only woman in the agriculture. I used to get starstruck meeting other women in agriculture because couldn't stop talking to them. I was so excited because it's so rare, and I've gotten so used to it. And now thinking about it, I must say I don't see a lot of women in the sector, and I do feel that awareness to women on a younger age would help them realize the opportunities of what the sector brings to them. What's possible, that it is not a male dominated area, because so often you find that most women would be in HR admin positions on a farm, and it would be mostly men managing the farming part, or even selling the poisons, fertilizers, even being part of irrigation specialists. Mostly it's male dominated, and I think women could really excel in that area given the opportunity and being made aware at a younger age, and setting so that they can set their minds to what is actually possible for them.
Thank you so much, Ika, just for sharing that experience. Timakatso, I think that you'd like to contribute to the conversation. Would you like to ask our speaker something or add?
Yeah, I'm listening to the conversation. It's so sad to hear that seems like women are not doing fine. Let me just give you a preview. I trained 1,250 people around 6 provinces in South Africa. But most of people who were keen and motivated to do agriculture were women. And out of the number that I've just indicated, out of 1,225, I managed to produce 12 provincial top female farmers of the year. Now, the problem with the women is that the women are not given good support, and especially support with regard to machinery, the fertilizers, and so forth. Again, the women are not given proper mentorship, because once one visited a place whereby a women farm and is being trained, you can see that somewhere the person who trained the woman doesn't know how things are done. And that's my concern. Mentorship is very, very, very important in order to uplift our women. And if we can break that element to bring in competent people, then I'm telling you, in South Africa or in Africa, we are going to have good women who knows agriculture.
Thank you so much for sharing your points and for contributing to the conversation. And I think that's definitely one of the questions that I had lined up here in terms of, technological advancements in agriculture and how women access it. A lot of the time, when it comes to small scale productions or people starting out on a much smaller scale, accessing mechanization is not easy, irrespective if you're a man or a woman. But it seems like it's just another tick against the woman that she now has to deal with. And I think Cleopatra, who now has dropped since, was very passionate about this and also wanted to contribute on this point specifically. But I'm maybe going to ask Porsha just to also contribute in terms of her experience working in more rural villages, how much that influences the advancement of women within the sector. Is it like Timakatso saying that it definitely holds women back? And how can we change this for women in the industry?
Timakatso has hit the nail on the head. When it comes to support, what I've found is that you cannot just offer training. Even if you offer implements, you're dealing with mindsets here. It has to be continuous. So that mentorship is important. And I found that in most of the villages that we've worked in, once we introduced continuous mentorship and the quality of the mentorship as well, and the quality of the training as well, it's just as important. There's a huge difference once you introduce mentorship, once you expose these women to the possibilities, because sometimes we reduce agriculture to just work in the fields, but there's so much more to it. A few years ago, what we did is that once these ladies had harvested their honey and packaged it in barrels and sent it to us, and we did the packaging. We sent it back to them because they don't realize the extent of their contribution. So I totally agree with Dimakatso to say you need to hold these ladies' hands in terms of support, walk with them, especially in the rural landscape. You walk with them the journey and you introduce them to the complete agricultural value chain. Then amazing things happen. And it's unfortunate because when you look at systems currently in the country, extension officers, there's challenges there. So training is not continuous. You sometimes find that implements will be dropped off and then people have to find their way through figuring things out, which sometimes just doesn't work.
I think that's definitely a very difficult aspect for women in the sector. And I think it's so vital for the growth. Can't say maybe you can just come in terms of your experience. You work in a very specific space, but I think you have a lot of experience in terms of how it works economically. If you have someone in a rural village compared to someone that might have a little bit more support, how does that compare really in terms of advancing women in the sector?
Just your question about me being in a different environment when you compare to, the farm and someone working in, let's say, the private sector, our stories are actually not that different. I believe Dr. Clausen actually alluded to it earlier that even with us, when I first joined the industry, when you'd go to organization conferences or you go to conventions or anything like that, it was really back in the day, there wasn't much representation of women. And over the years, I have seen an improvement in the private sector. Even for us, it's a matter of just making those networks. And sometimes you need to take the initiative and meet people on your own and build your relationships. Find other women in the industry that can help you, navigate your career. That's how you get to know what is happening and get to know that other women also in the industry are facing the same challenges as you. And then you build your own repertoire and your reputation and your confidence and you get ahead. It's always really a personal thing that you need to take charge of, I believe, when you are in this industry, unfortunately, that sometimes we don't get the access or we don't get the information, but there is information. There are people that are there to assist you. So if you knock on certain doors, obviously you might get no's, but somewhere else you will get a yes and you will get someone who's willing to assist you. So there are organizations, there are forums, there are people that are willing to help you. So it's always good to just always also just take that initiative. That is just my side note on my own experience in the sector. When I'm thinking about just financing, obviously from my experience, if you're going to look for a loan and you're just someone who was in a remote area, not really have market access or have collateral, it really makes things difficult when you're trying to get funding because you can't prove your repayment abilities, as opposed to someone who probably has an offtake agreement because they've got a mentor and they've got someone who showed them how to navigate the business world of farming. And they're not just farming subsistencing, they are actually farming to commercialize. And they have people that they can lean on in terms of information, in terms of technology, adaptation, financing, and getting into the market. So that definitely even widens the gap between these two farmers. Let's say farmer A, who's there in the rural area, doesn't have support compared to the other person who has support. So like I said, the rural people are the most at peril, and information, like Cleopatra said, it needs to somehow filter down to that grassroots level. And that's where we need to bridge the gap because it influences the growth aspects of that farm. If you don't have access to information, if you don't have anyone mentoring you, like Dimakajo mentioned, and if you don't even know where to start looking, you are not going to be growing that farm. You'll just be farming just to feed your family and not growing it beyond your actual gate and not even selling it to market. So that then obviously puts you at a disadvantage.
Thank you so much, Conce. And I was also just wanted to chat about financing. I think I mentioned briefly accessing land as being one of the other issues. But I maybe want to bring Dr. Didi Clausen into the conversation again, just to talk about the animal health sector. There's so many different aspects to agriculture. We haven't really touched on agro-processing. I think Petronella mentioned, that people should start thinking about what happens along the value chain, women specifically, and not just specifically focused on what they're doing right. But maybe just to talk about how important accessing information is, especially within the animal health sector, and specifically with women who are choosing to farm with livestock. How is that sometimes a barrier? I think we mentioned it earlier in the conversation, but more so, how do we overcome the challenge and how do we advance it, Dr. Klassen?
I think the issue is actually so much bigger than just females. So if we look at South Africa as a whole, we have the commercial sector and we have the emerging sector. The emerging sector itself, male and female, there's a discrepancy with access to knowledge, and it's changing, and people are growing in this aspect, but not fast enough. And if you now take the discrepancies between, let alone emerging and then commercial, but now looking at male and females are at even a bigger disadvantage, but there is hope. I can, for example, if we look at the emerging versus commercial sector differences, we had a project in the Eastern Cape where we started dip tanks and doing education at the dip tanks. People would bring their animals and then we'd have farmers' days. And then recently we had the first commercial auction of cattle in that area. So obviously majority of the people would be male in that aspect. But I think if we implement these sort of efforts where we make information available to all sectors in agriculture and then specifically focusing on the female farmers and where we can assist them, not only from government involvement with the female farmer projects that they're running in the different provinces, but also from the private sector, sort of saying your animal health, pharmaceutical companies can get involved, the private sector stakeholders like the National Wool Growers Association, etc., or the red meat industry, if they can get involved on ground level, uplifting female farmers, I think that will be a way we can address it, but that we all take hands and then specifically hone in on female farmers as a group with giving them knowledge and then helping them set up businesses. So how to farm, but then to get it to a commercial auction level, for example, if it's cattle, or get them into the egg or the broiler market, if it's more poultry sector, etc. These are not just examples.
Thanks so much, Dr. Didi Klassen. And I think that the conversation is bigger than just focusing on this, but there's so many intricacies, and I think it would probably take us 2, 3, maybe even months to talk about all the aspects of it. But I think it's also just important to talk about some of the small wins and some of the advances that have been made. Petronella, maybe just to talk more about, some of the solution-driven, decisions that women can actively make, or conversations that we can start having around what is there outside beyond the farm gate that Kansé spoke about. And also for me, I honestly believe that the future farmer in this country is female, and that is where people are sort of gearing their mind towards growth and funding and resources. Do you agree with this? And what are some of the, examples of how you've experienced it and the work that you're doing?
I'll give an example of a project that we are involved in Nigeria, where it is a 50,000 hectare farm, and the women were facing so many challenges, things like using their own savings, family loans. There was no funding access. So what we then did is, the land was not fit enough for farming, but it was fit enough for hydroponics. So we went on a full-scale hydroponic, and we changed the game of what was involved, because the women were given a piece of land that was not going to produce anything that was going to be effective. And we thought outside the box, and then we decided that maybe a new approach to farming, but still execute what they wanted to do in that particular state. So I would say that the women need the mentorship. They need the guidance, just like Mr. Demakatsu spoke about, saying, you had 1,000 women and only 12 of them became top farmers, meaning that we do have a deficit of the others that face many challenges, especially in Southern Africa, whereby, women have got responsibilities of balancing between a thriving business as well as homes and families being the primary caregivers. So with that in mind, those are some of the conversations we need to have. How do we help, a rural woman to balance raising a family and also being in the business sector, which is very possible. But we now have to come back and change their mindset while helping them. How do we help them to start a business, not necessarily based on capital, but on resources that they have to maneuver around what opportunities that they see? We did case studies of other countries like Israel or Jordan's, where it's purely desert. Yes, some people might say they have the capital to do it, but most of those projects were done with no capital. Money then came as an afterthought to what was put on the ground. So there are some ways we have looked at where people have done group funding, as groups, as women with particular ideas. Some are just good at the raw end, some are good at the secondary end, which is then to have a full output of the product. And by combining the two, you'll find that the women are going to be able to execute, because if we surely wait only on our governments alone, we're just going to be given policies that might work, that might not work. If you wait for the bank to give you funding, you might get it, you might not get it. So I think women must be given an option to say, start with where you are, start with what you have, build from it and grow from it. And you'll find that I think women are going to be more intrigued to come and join agriculture. I think a speaker spoke and said, it's the perception that women have of agriculture. We've got males who've come and asked us and said, are you ladies truly in agriculture? Because you don't look like farmers. And we asked them, so what do female farmers look like? All these things can be put into place to encourage farmers that are there to grow, to think outside the box, to venture into new possibilities and opportunities, and to succeed. And it can only be done if people work in platforms like the one you've given us, Dawn, with Food from Mzansi, for people to discuss, for people to network, for people to be willing to help each other and grow. And these are some of the things, especially West Africa is growing with. They have come to combine their cooperatives. They've come to combine the groups of women that they have to produce things, from your cocoa powders to your cocoa. And I think Southern Africa, if it embraces such things, we're going to be able to grow. We're going to be able to even export our produce.
Thanks, Petronella. I think it's so vital that we kind of recognize that what we think of the agriculture is not at all what it represents. And that is very broad scale. I mean, for us working in the industry, we understand how dynamic it is. But for people looking in, like you're saying, they will question you to say, are you really working in agriculture? Yes, I am. I'm working as an agricultural journalist. I'm a woman and I'm working in the agricultural sector. I'm in the space. So I think that's probably what we should start about when we talk about agriculture. It's so broad. And it's important for people and young women, young girls to start thinking about it as an option. Gugulethu, welcome. Gugulethu Mahlangu is also a very dynamic woman working in the agricultural space. Gugu, it's great to have you here. I would maybe just like to ask our speakers to talk about some of the contributions that they've seen women make to change their communities through agriculture. Maybe you yourself is practically involved in it. Maybe you've seen it. Because I would like to just celebrate it as well, so that we can understand that it is happening, it is changing, and it won't be the same forever. Karabo, maybe I can start with you, and then I would like to also ask Ika to contribute, and then Diwe.
I'm going to address this from the channel sort of point of view, because we continuously have a lot of engagement with women. We'll see from the engagements that more and more women are actually stepping up. We had a lady that we visited who owns berry farm now. She knew nothing about grow berries or actually the business, but she actually stepped up to the challenge, and she's doing amazing things. So also I think in terms of agri-tech, it's currently an industry that is booming. We see a lot of technology innovations that help improve your farming operation. We recently, Konsi and I had a conversation with this amazing lady, who does not even have any agri background, but she just has a channel for innovation and technology. And all she is doing is just embracing, the digital evolution of agriculture through her passion in the technology space of things. So to see such women actually come up and do such amazing things, will actually show you that it's all about a will, and for you to have like your big dreams and to follow through. And I think maybe in terms of the e-commerce space, I feel like this is where we've seen like a simplified maybe approach to trading, where buyers and sellers actually directly link. So as women farmers, I feel like this is where we are currently, aiding in terms of the communities that we are based in. And farmers must actually adopt these solutions, especially female smallholder farmers, as technology will obviously enable them to be more productive and competitive and sustainable. So I see technology going forward helping smallholder farmers especially, and all the farmers, to contribute even more to the communities and also in terms of their profitability as a whole.
Thank you so much, Karabo, for that. I see Guguletu. Would you like to contribute or add to the conversation?
Hi, Dawn. Thank you so much for having this space and happy Women's Month. But I have a question for our speakers. We all know that, there is a spread of modern supply chains in developing countries, especially the SADC region, right? And it's changing the way food is being produced and traded. Women workers are slowly coming in, agriculture, but yet it's still the most least secure, underpaid, labor-intensive farm job, because women are coming in as farm hands. So a lot of times I get this question as, a person in farming, someone be like, I don't have maybe the funds or the capital to start farm now, but I would like to venture into agriculture. So what would be the best advice for somebody who'd like to work in the agricultural industry? Like, where are the spaces and places, in the industry for women to actually start entering in, especially if, these women are not maybe experienced or qualified, but they'd like to just venture in agriculture and really grow within it? What are some of the spaces throughout the entire supply chain do you think women can enter into?
Thank you so much for your question. And I think it's so important. We touched briefly on, equal pay and, jobs for women in the agricultural space being less secure and, the type of jobs that are open to women not being as established as what people would perceive men's jobs are. So, often seasonal work being one of it, and that's not secure. But it's a very good question. So where should we be looking at? Where should young women, young girls be thinking about moving into the agricultural space with limited resources? Porsha, maybe you can come into the conversation and also just share your take. And then Diwe, you also, new to the sector. So what advice would you have to anyone aspiring to be in the industry? Porsha, I'm going to start with you.
To answer Google, I would say, and somebody touched on this, to say, if you start from where you are, I'm going to refer back to the rural landscape, whereby we're finding that we encouraging people to be working within the communities that they're in before sort of growing big, especially if you've got very limited resources. Use your own natural resources and own natural information that you have within your natural environments to actually start. Because I do believe that in any community, there's some kind of farming that happens. And I find it's easier to attract donor funders. It's easier to attract financing if they find that you've started elsewhere. And that's how I started, with not much, but for a mere fact that I had started with my 10 hives, some people even less, that shows that you are willing to get into the space. And to answer your last comment, I would say we shouldn't downplay, in actual fact, the importance of agriculture in terms of being able to solve social ills. And more so if you include women as nurturers, if we include women as people, I would say, farming with the heart or dealing with nature in a more coexisting manner. In such a way, if we don't downplay how agriculture can actually solve so many of our social ills, it's easier to introduce so many more people to say there's so many elements to this agriculture and you can use that for good.
Thank you so much for that, Porsha. Lindiwe, maybe you can also just talk about the opportunities that you've gained and responding to Gugu's question about which space, a woman should be thinking about if they'd like to start.
I think it's a matter of knocking at the right doors. There are a lot of doors which are open to people who are looking to start into agriculture. Well, with the opportunities I have had, the Department of Agriculture has given me that opportunity to be exposed to advisory and extension services. Future Farmers is a great start. They allow you to be placed in a farm. In that, you gain the necessary skills and knowledge to know about farming, what to expect, what not to expect. And after that, Future Farmers also offers you an opportunity to go abroad, to have practical farm experience as well. That open up more channels because you are now exposed to agriculture on the other side of the world. So young people should actually look into going into Future Farmers and also other abroad opportunities that are open. There are many other channels as well, such as the NYDA, which offer funding. However, as Porsha said, funding works best if you have started something. If you can say that I have done this, I have accomplished that, what I need right now is this, so I can continue with my farming. So you can look into the NYDA, you can look into Operation Vula. These are the two initiatives that are open for youth and actually provide funding. However, I feel like it's very important to have something first, have that diploma or have that certificate, know what you want to do, and then the doors will definitely open thereafter.
Thank you so much, Lindiwe, and I hope that answers your question, Gugu. Dimakatso, I see you unmuting your mic. Would you like to add something?
I heard what Gugu has just said, but it's so painful because we produced lots of students, competent women who are not even lazy, who will work from dawn to dusk. And we introduce them to the relevant people, advise them to go to knock to relevant doors. But unfortunately, all was in vain. One will just say, now you train the poor woman, now started being motivated and can do the right thing. But the problem is funding. Now, I don't know whether this funding is, I don't want to put politics inside, that I want the weight that is given to relevant people, others, they don't get it. That's my problem. Because, ladies and gentlemen, women, according to me, they are more powerful than men in agriculture. I've seen that. Since 2008 until today, I've been engaged in agriculture and I've been engaged with the women. They can do it. If really one can advise the women to which door precisely whereby they can get support, then it will be a good thing. Because some of them now, they just punched and say, what are we doing? We are out of agriculture, we are now going to sell maguinas. That's the problem. Women can do it, and women can feed the nation.
I couldn't agree with you more, Dimakatso. I think that, accessing the right resources at the right time is vital. And I'm hoping that, I think I said this once before, I'm definitely going to organize a space where we have these commodity organizations, funders coming through and saying, yes, I have an opportunity here. Yes, there's space for funding here. This is where you access it. A more practical, hands-on type of conversation where anyone listening can say, I heard that there's a funding available, there are resources available. So I definitely think that there's a conversation that needs to be had after this one about that issue specifically. So thank you so much for highlighting that. Okay, I'm going to ask all of them just to share one last message with everyone. But as we wrap up, maybe just the last comment. Ika, I'm going to start with you and then move on from there.
I really do believe that women are very strong in agriculture, and that I think specifically it's because of the attention to detail. And I think that if we can start a ripple effect, and I mean, that's kind of what Food for Mzansi is doing, is starting the conversation, getting the information out there. If everyone can just start doing that in their own immediate environment and get that ripple effect going into the communities and spreading it, I think we'll be able to motivate women to become more interested in agriculture and to become employable, and so that they have the opportunity and the right backing of education to get funding and to get a solid business plan up and going. Because I think that is kind of a very important point, is just to have that knowledge behind you so that you can for sure say that you know what you want and you know how to get it. You just need some support. I completely support what Food for Mzansi is doing. I think it's great, and I hope to see many more female farmers in the near future.
Definitely, and so do I. So thank you so much, Ika. And again, hats off to what you're doing in the industry as well. Dr. Claassen, would you like to maybe also share your last comments as we wrap up the conversation?
Something that stood out for me tonight from the discussion was this whole culture thing. And I think the biggest driver of change is if we as females believe that we can do this in the face of the adversity of, I don't want to say people looking down on us, but I think the cultural challenges, the resource challenges. But if we can start believing that, yes, we are good at what we're doing and we are different in the way we do it, but that we can do it, I think that's where the change will start, is when we start believing in ourselves. And yeah, so I really thought that was a good point, and I'm going to think about it a bit more and how we can help people change their outlook on things. Because if you don't believe you can do it, then slightest adversity is going to stop you from achieving what you are able to do.
Thank you so much. Very good point. Really enjoyed it. Karabo, maybe your last point, and then Lindiwe after.
The world keeps changing so fast. So as women, we need to keep learning. We need to try and keep up to date with the latest trends, be it production trends, the needs of consumers, how we can use the new technological advancements to our advantage so that we can sort of create opportunities for ourselves and knock on those doors, because in agriculture is it's a field that is very knowledge intensive. So continuous learning is obviously very important. Thank you to Food from Mzansi, for creating such platforms where our challenges are being shared, as well as, our successes, are being celebrated. So lastly, maybe as women, we need to be sort of intentional about mentoring each other and, being there for each other so that we can be able to show up and, do better.
Thank you, Karabo. I totally agree with that as well. Lindiwe, maybe your last point?
I would firstly like to say that the future of farming is definitely female, and we're almost there. And in the next 3 to 4 years from now, I feel as if the future will be female. I'd like to also say that it's okay to start small. It's okay to start dirty, being all dirty. No one ever said agriculture is fancy. So if we are willing to start small, we are definitely going to grow big. And all of these challenges that we are facing now, we will definitely overcome in the future. Opportunities are there, doors are open, and it's just only for us to take that step and that leap of faith. And we are definitely going to be pioneers in the agricultural sector in South Africa.
Thank you so much for that, Lindiwe. Conte, I see you've unmuted your mic.
My closing statement: the world is really changing, as Karabo also mentioned, but also our climate is changing. We are now in a phase where there's constantly adverse weather effects. We see that there's so many changes that is actually affecting how and when we can actually produce food. I just want to touch on how vast the agricultural industry is in terms of careers. Even if you don't want to farm, I've been fortunate enough to work in an industry now that actually produces chemicals. I'm working with agronomists, plant pathologists, food scientists, soil scientists, like really amazing intellectual women that are producing the most high-tech, out of this world science that is protecting plants, making sure that the yields are achieved and we are growing produce at the highest quality in South Africa to feed ourselves locally, as well as to export and make sure that we are profitable and we can also produce and export to the global markets. So when you're thinking agriculture, don't just think dirt, don't just think it is restricted to being on a farm, but there's really opportunities from the farm up until the highest of the supply chain, even in processing, even being a scientist, if that is really what you like. That's really where we need to be and where the space that we need to take up. Like I said, the world is really changing and people will always need to be fed. So we are in the right industry and the opportunities are really vast and endless. And we need to really just take up space as women and own it and make sure that our voices are heard.
Thank you so much, Kansai. Porsha, would you like to share your comments?
I mentioned already that it's okay to run our businesses and our farms with a heart. We don't have to repeat the same mistakes that male counterparts made previously, considering what's happening with the environment now. If I could make a plea that everybody, while we venturing out and doing amazing things, we consider the people, the planet, and then the profits. So we can have it all. There's absolutely nothing preventing us from saying, let's do this commercial farming different to preserve earth for future generations as well.
Thank you so much, Porsha. And I think that's a very important point that you're making. Petronella, just your final comments. I think Cleo is not here, but you're the last speaker. Just to share your final comments and also just a word of encouragement.
We all spoke from our hearts what we want to see. And indeed, as the previous speaker spoke and said that, the future is female. We are nearly there. But let us all just, continuously keep on innovating. Innovation is a muscle, and the more you exercise it, and if you adopt it early, the more advantages we get in the industry. So when we take control of our journey and we continue to persevere, we don't give up. I think surely all of us in our own respective industries, we're going to come up and be role models to the younger females, the teens that are coming up, because agriculture is a beautiful, beautiful industry that just needs to be showcased in a different light. So in conclusion, I think, let us use our natural instincts, as Porsha said. We don't have to compete with the men, but we can also enhance the space and show them a different aspect of agriculture and build from it. Thank you so much, Dawn. Thank you, Food for Mzansi. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much to all of my speakers. It's been a great time, spending with you. And I just would like to emphasize that I totally champion women in the sector. I myself fell in love with the sector and I don't think I would go back to anything else. So thank you so much for being here. And again, our farming future is definitely female. And if you don't agree with me, you can quote me on it in 20 years' time. Thank you so much again. And if you missed any part of this conversation, it will be available on Food for Mzansi's YouTube channel. And of course, you can also read the article that will be published on Food for Mzansi as well. As I was contacting people and approaching people for this conversation, that I have met the most amazing woman in the sector. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being you. And thank you so much for continuing to work in this space. So have a good evening, everyone, and the rest of your evening. Bye for now.